Every single day, we're completely bombarded by the news, right? But how often do we actually stop to dissect the invisible battlefield of media framing? Well, as someone who works in the media, I can tell you that long before troops are deployed or geopolitical red lines are crossed, a completely different kind of conflict is already underway. It's a conflict over perception, over narrative, and over the very words we use to understand global events. What to think about any specific global conflict. Instead, we're going to pull back the curtain and show you exactly how the media ecosystem is built to guide your thinking. So let me ask you something. When does a war actually begin? I mean, most of us picture the exact moment a border is breached, or maybe the moment the first missile is fired. But from a media analyst's perspective, I'll tell you that conflicts are often launched and framed long before physical combat ever starts. They begin in editorial meetings, they begin with highly deliberate vocabulary choices. They begin with the actual architecture of a headline. By the time that breaking news alert hits your phone, the narrative rules of engagement have already been firmly established. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the War of Words. Think about the absolute foundational tool of any newsroom: language. We hear terms like the Iran war tossed around constantly on Western news networks. But let's actually pause for a second and genuinely think about this. Why is a conflict called the Iran war? If, for instance, a conflict was actually initiated by United States and Israeli strikes directed at Iran, then labeling the entire ensuing geopolitical crisis as the Iran war isn't just some convenient shorthand. No, it is a highly calculated linguistic and political choice. You see, language in the media is never entirely neutral. Words don't just report the news, they actively shape it. They subconsciously instruct you, the viewer, on exactly who is the aggressor, who is the instigator, and who is the victim. It's narrative framing at its most fundamental level. Moving right along to Section 2, hiding behind passive headlines. Okay, think about how this framing is built into the very first thing you read. You might see a headline that says, Iran war intensifies, or you might see a much more direct alternative, like US and Israeli forces launch strikes. The difference here is absolutely staggering once you learn to spot it. Read that first one again. Iran war intensifies. Notice what's missing? There's literally no actor. There's zero agency. That phrase makes the conflict sound like a sudden thunderstorm or an earthquake, just some natural disaster that manifested out of thin air. It just, intensified. But in the second headline, US and Israeli forces launch strikes, the agency is crystal clear. It tells you exactly who took action and exactly what they did. Hiding agency is arguably the most critical and, frankly, the most frequently used tactic in modern news discourse. In the industry, this tactic relies entirely on passive language, and you see these phrases every single day. Violence erupted, tensions flared, blows were exchanged. When headlines use passive language like this, they very conveniently omit who actually threw the first punch. But here is the crazy psychological trick. The human brain still really wants someone to blame. So, when the headline reads, "Violence erupted in Iran," the responsibility becomes instantly blurred. Because Iran is the only specific noun your brain has to latch onto, you subconsciously associate all the blame entirely with that named country. As a reader, you walk away feeling like the named country is the root cause of the chaos, simply because they were the only actor present in the sentence. It's a remarkably powerful psychological framing device. All right, that brings us to Section 3, the vocabulary of conflict. So passive headlines are one thing, right? But what happens when editors do decide to use active verbs? Well, the double standard is glaring. When Western allies take military action, it is routinely framed as a retaliation, a defensive strike, or a precision attack. Think about those words. They imply measured, justified, and really careful action. The word retaliation inherently tells you, hey, they hit us first, we're just responding. But when an opponent, in this context Iran, takes the exact same military action, it's like the entire dictionary just flips upside down. Suddenly, the words used are aggression, a missile barrage, or an escalation. These words imply unprovoked hostility, recklessness, and total chaos. One side is framed as maintaining order, while the other is framed as violating it. Here's the absolute crucial point you need to take away from this. These vocabulary discrepancies, they are not accidental typos. Not a chance. Editors literally sit in rooms and debate these exact words before a broadcast ever goes live. This specific choice of language acts as a mechanism. It builds and manufactures public consent for ongoing policies or conflicts. If you are constantly hearing that your side is executing defensive precision strikes against a foreign nation's unprovoked aggression, well, you're far more likely to support the war effort.
The language primes the public to just accept the actions of the powerful.
And that leads us perfectly into Section 4, cropping the timeline.
Time itself is just as malleable in the hands of a skilled editor. In geopolitics, events are part of this long, incredibly complex chain of cause and effect. Consider a sequence where severe economic sanctions are implemented years ago, followed by covert operations conducted months ago, and then targeted assassinations that happened just weeks ago. Then, today, there is a military retaliation. Now imagine a news broadcast that completely ignores those first three events. The anchor looks right into the camera and begins the story strictly at today's retaliation. If you don't know the background and the news only shows you that final step, it looks completely unprovoked, doesn't it? It looks like sudden, irrational hostility. By simply choosing where to start the clock, the news cycle can completely invert the roles of instigator and responder.
In media analysis, we actually have a specific name for this tactic. We call it narrative cropping. Just like you can crop a photograph to remove, say, something embarrassing in the background, editors can crop a timeline to remove vital context. Narrative cropping is the ultimate tool for erasing history. It allows the storyteller to dictate the cause and effect narrative entirely on their own terms. The story conveniently begins exactly at the moment that justifies the actions of the powerful party, rendering all prior provocations completely invisible to the average viewer.
So the invisible battlefield really does begin with word choice. Conflicts are fought, managed, and framed in newsrooms and editorial suites long before armies are ever mobilized. Whether it's through passive headlines that conveniently hide the attacker, biased verbs that justify violence, or cropped timelines that literally erase history, the information you consume is meticulously curated.
Which leaves us with one absolutely vital question to ask ourselves every single time we scroll through our feeds. The real question isn't just whether a conflict is happening. The ultimate question is, who is writing the story, and in what language are they choosing to write it?